everybody for getting up early, for those who made it to dinner yesterday and we sit around and chat. So I appreciate everybody taking the time to come to Automate and then splitting off from Automate to participate in what this will be our 10th edition of the ROS Industrial Consortium Americas annual meeting. Right. So great. Sorry. Yes. There we go. Right. So last year, some of you may recall, was the 10th anniversary of the ROS Industrial Open Source project. So we created every so often we create these mashups, and so we unveiled this actually at this event last year. But obviously, a year after the project was launched, it was decided, and with the help of Shaun, Paul Voss, who couldn't be here today, Paul Evans, Blake Flanagan, and a number of folks, we were able to start up a consortium. And the idea being, there's a lot you can do in open source, right? So how do we actually organize ourselves? How do we make priorities? What's of interest to the folks who are trying to solve problems, right? And what best can be delivered? What kind of resources are needed? What kind of tools? I hear there's some work that can be done on documentation. So anyways, that's kind of a little bit where we came and what we discussed last year as far as the journey. But this year, obviously, we're just excited to be able to convene this for a 10th year. And who knows what we'll be talking 10 years from now. So good times. But as I alluded to, right, obviously the project, right? So I got asked numerous times, and some of you at one point in time maybe have asked me this question, like, oh, what's it like to work for ROS Industrial? And ROS Industrial is a project, right? It's an open source project that we hope a number of people leverage and contribute to, right? But then the consortium is the way that we kind of both keep it alive, and I'll share some of that, how we're investing those dollars from the membership, but also, right, give it some direction. And that's right, a big point of this meeting. And you'll see that if you have looked at the agenda, there's time just to talk with collaborators. We have friends from Adam Norton here from Nerve Center and David Paulette from Steel Founders to basically talk about automation more in general, more broadly, but then obviously what's going on in open source and how can it be more effectively leveraged, particularly in industries that have really challenging needs and conditions. So that's where we're really excited about. Obviously, for some of you who saw our demo, we fully released, and I've actually started using the components of the scan and plan demo you saw for those who walk the floor. That's actually being used in training content now, right? So if you have signed up for a focused or advanced topic, that motion planning pipeline is the actual motion planning pipeline that it's in the demo out there running on the floor. And so if you have questions or need help finding that GitHub repository and curious about that, we can get you there. As I alluded to, the topic. One thing we're going to talk a little bit about today is this, the robotic blending milestone 5, right? So one other thing that the consortium does is we can allow full members to sponsor or champion, sorry, the acronym, FTPs, Focused Technical Projects. And we got one off the ground, right? So courtesy of the Steel Founders Society of America and some of they have a member foundry that's agreed to drop a big robotic system on their floor in collaboration with a number of other partners, Push Corp and Yaskawa being a couple, and Iowa State, who's here in the room today, thank you. And a couple other in-kind contributors. We're hoping to be able to actually demonstrate it in an operational foundry and then leave it there and they have continued success, right? So that's a real exciting opportunity. We've done some works on the motion reconstruction, or sorry, the scanning reconstruction work that's been going on. That's been built on Open3D. So some of you have maybe used that, the colorized meshes you've seen, that's also in the demo. So there's been some recent updates to that. And so we're trying to get the word out on that, and including potentially a workshop around industrial reconstruction, because there is a lot of knobs to turn. We could probably build out a little bit more documentation on what those knobs do. But in the interim, we're trying to spin together a workshop, so stay tuned on that. And we had some work on real-time motion planning, and that continues. I alluded to it already about the building motion planning pipeline. We look forward to taking the workshop and building out additional training. I mentioned industrial reconstruction is potentially one of them. We could even get into things like toolpath planning and other different features, depending on what's of interest. And obviously, we'll have some workshop time today with Michael. Feel free to offer kind of hey, where are some interests? And also, I would be remiss not to note that we have our collaborators from ROS Industrial European Union and ROS Industrial Asia Pacific. And we are actively discussing how to better leverage each other's training. So if you have questions about, hey, I've actually noticed that ROS-I EU is offering X, Like, why isn't it here? Right. And those are really great questions. And we're actively working on how to share our resources and be more efficient and make them, really make this project global. We've been also taking training back on the road. So one thing that happened at COVID, some of you guys may remember COVID, it was this big event that kind of slowed things down for a little bit, but we're back on the road for training. So we were in Boston in October and Troy, New York. So thanks to Analog Devices and Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute for hosting those training events. It's a great way to have training, not just in San Antonio. I get it. You all want to come down for some Tex-Mex. I appreciate that. But it is nice to be able to have it in different locations, right? We like to get it into like each region of the country at least once a year, right? So these are really great opportunities. I can see here it's a little East Coast heavy, so sometimes that's how the cards fall. But we're excited. If you're interested in hosting a training event, like talk to me. I'm here all day, or whenever you think the timing fits, we can see what we can work out. Michael's going to do a lot more technical dive. But there's been a lot of really great activity. NIST last year came and spoke, and I don't know, he didn't really get into the details, but the NIST contact suite is really interesting. The intent there is NIST provided a grant to create a framework to enable the testing or a means to implement reinforcement learning policies, but then test them on different things in a finite set of kind of assembly tasks. So the goal is right, reinforcement learning for those who've messed with it, right, can be a little brittle. Like you'll get it all trained up, it's doing great, but then like, hey, after doing this Ethernet cable that I've trained you up on, do this USB-A connection, and it breaks apart. So contact was a means to do force torque sensing assembly in an abstracted framework where people could test learning policies. But it turns out it's actually pretty handy for just doing assembly tasks. So that's fully open source. If you are interested in assembly using force torque, we're happy. We're currently in the process of porting that to ROS-II, but we're happy to share the work that's going on there. Like I said, we're looking forward, the workshops out there. We look forward to we're working to organize the event around that workshop, so stay tuned. I do this event, right? Like sometimes I'll just do like an update, but I do this particular audience and this particular event. I do try to talk where the investment goes, right? So largely you're all members, right? So you're basically funding the ROS Industrial Open Source Project to a degree that we can keep it maintained. And this is where it goes, right? So you'll notice like this is actually the graph from last year. It's always very interesting. Tech support, right? So for those of you who are members, you get a certain amount of tech support, 1-800 help me out. And Michael answers the phone and answers all your questions. But anyways, you can see it's sort of split up here, right? We spend a lot of effort on training. We went through a lot of versioning of the training. Obviously, there was the big jump to ROS-II. More recently, we had to do some other additions, bringing on new content and getting it back on the road. So in 2022, you can see here in 23, we saw we're in 23, but it's obviously mostly in the last year because of our consortium year timing in March. But you can see here we got a little bump up in maintenance and tech support. So it's obviously an indication that people are taking advantage of that benefit. We know we had a few new members like jumping calls, like trying to get spun up. We're here to help, and that's what we want to do. Again, still training. In general, still trending about the same. We're hoping to get a little bit more efficient with training. Our next training event's in July, so feel free to come and check it out. We'll be doing that motion planning pipeline advanced topic again. So, but this is sort of the breakdown. We look forward to helping you guys out. So obviously, let us know if you have questions or content or want to learn more about your available tech support. So one thing I want to talk a little bit about, we are going to, obviously, when you talk with Michael, we're going to have a rotating workshop period. And one thing that's very important for us is to get feedback about what we should be prioritizing, right? So you saw the prior graphic, right? We were doing maintenance, but obviously some of that is actually improving repositories, and it could be building examples. The scan and plan workshop is actually a really good example of that. But our 4 core themes that have still come out and have really kind of remained have been around ease of use, advanced capability, and interoperability, as well as how people interact with systems. That's still true, but how is that actually getting out into your hands or in the repositories you have access to or in the training? And these are sort of our journey, at least as relevant what we've been trying to do on this. So when we started talking about the advent of ROS-II, and we really started pushing harder on ROS-II in about 2018, there was an early ARM Institute project around collaborative robotic standing at the time. A lot of our colleagues in the industrial space weren't quite dipping their toe yet into ROS2 as far as like they're trying to deploy something. So we collaborated with Spirit Aerosystems with the ARM Institute and did the collaborative robotic standing project, and that is still open source. Feel free to check that out. It's a little long in the tooth now, right? Because I think it was dashing at the time. But that was our first foray, right? And it was very intentional to put a full application out there so people could actually learn, hey, you can do this and it will work. And oh, we had to use the bridge, but this is how you can use the bridge. And at the time, it was very useful to do that, right? I mean, in some places, though our developers sometimes will not be so excited when I suggest some of these things, right? But this is like how we can kind of like, hey, you can do this. We've taken a few lumps, we've learned. We're here to help you learn as well. So from there, right, obviously from just doing pilot projects, we really worked on improving member capability, right? So we sought very early on to try to get our training up to ROS2, right? So once, I believe, we're in Foxy now. I think we had ROS2 a little bit before then, the release prior, because then we had to port to Foxy. But that was the big deal, right? So once we kind of like got our feet wet in an actual project, we're like, okay, we need to get the training in the door, and that's what we did. And then continued in collaboration with the ARM Institute on funded initiatives. And then of course we had our first client funded initiative, a couple of them there, and got them to kind of like, okay, this ROS2 thing's still a little unproven to us in factories, but sure, if you guys can do it, we'll go with it. And so it was around that time, shortly after the initial pilot program, we did some actual explicit funded efforts and deployments. So since then, obviously, we've been doing a lot more work. Obviously, full out training around optimization-based motion planning and how we have that incorporated into ROS2, industrial reconstruction and how that's performing, and additional sample applications. And of course, now just really fully leveraging the workshop and subsequent workshops, both through the perception and reconstruction pipelines, all the way through motion planning. So that's been sort of the journey where we're trying to enable and drive confidence in using ROS2. Obviously, the more of us are using it, the better it can get. We're in this sort of like weird catch-22 situation. We're like, well, but we don't have all this institutional knowledge and resources and examples and all the answers that we have with ROS1. And I'm like, well, we'll never build that up if, unless we start doing ROS2 stuff, right? So we're trying to play our role and fill a little bit of that void or make that contribution to build up that knowledge base. So hopefully you guys are seeing and appreciating that. Obviously, we'll be workshopping today, but this is a lot of the key themes that came out of last year, right? And Michael will talk also a little bit about some efforts we're doing in ease of use. And obviously, we appreciate the efforts. And obviously, Flow State, the announcement from the Intrinsic team, is a real step forward on ease of use. And Move It Studio is a really great example. These are all great. Hey, not just us, not just our little consortium trying to push on this from the industry voice, but having other entities jump in as well. It's a really exciting time. And we're continuing to kind of work on this list and provide a little bit more references that help. So anyways, I wanted to set aside a little bit of time here. I have a special guest today because this is the 10th anniversary. So I asked Shaun, and he's here, joined us today from PlusOne. I kind of got the whole ROS industrial open source project going with the first commit. Him and Paul were both going to say a few words, but Paul couldn't be here today. But Shaun, if you will, welcome Shaun Edwards, CTO PlusOne.
Yeah. All right. So normally Paul's here, and I just get up and stand next to him while he talks. But he had to go home and fix something at PlusOne. So unfortunately, he couldn't make it. But it's kind of amazing that this lasted 10 years. And it's going to last much longer than that. I think back when we started, we had to convince people just that open source software could even be used outside of an academic lab. And, it took a lot of people, working really hard just to kind of get over that hurdle. But once we did, things did start to take off, and people started using it and gaining adoption, and all of that was just kind of amazing to watch. And it's each of you guys who put in that effort. You guys all deserve credit for kind of supporting this initiative and getting it this far. And I think one of the coolest things that I probably didn't ever think about, right, was that there's a whole set of companies that are doing industrial related tasks, and they started using ROS. And I'm not sure they would have done that without kind of the people in this room kind of pushing for those types of applications, right? 10 years ago when we started, ROS was just going to be something that you use for robots in your home. And we all have robots in our home now, right? No, we don't. I think, I think about, Paul Evans. If you don't know, he basically let me go to Silicon Valley for 6 months and play with some robots. But he understood the value of that technology, and he believed that it could really have a transformative effect on industrial robotics. And I think 10 years in, that's really what we're seeing with these companies solving real problems now. And a lot of that, I was telling Paul, scan and plan is one of my favorite examples. And I'm pretty sure that SwRI did the first work on scan and plan. They certainly coined the term, but they did the first work on scan and plan as part of ROS industrial focused technical projects. And while it was never SwRI's goal to build companies, that's exactly what happened, is that companies saw that work and they were either inspired by it, they may have leveraged it, but now like that kind of ability is something you can go out to a company and get. And so that's a huge accomplishment in my book. So I think there's amazing things that this group has done in 10 years. And the question is, what are we going to do in the next 10 years, right? And, Paul and I were just talking, we're like, oh, we need somebody who's young and motivated and has a vision, because that's what it took to get all this started, right? And if we had somebody like now and they have the power of this community that's been built, they can achieve even bigger things. And so Matt asked me to talk about like, what could we do next? And, I certainly have some ideas, but I would challenge, you guys, especially, the younger ones who have this passion and have the time and the commitment. This is your community, right? What can you do to leverage this community? And the one thing I'll tell you is it won't be easy, right? If you have a great idea, at least I perhaps naively thought a great idea will just attract all these people and they're all going to come work on it. And I'll just write some awesome code, or not awesome code if you've seen some of my open source contributions. But anyway, it turns out it's not the awesome code that really attracts everybody. It's the passion that you put into something, and you really got to build up a team to help you pursue what you want to do, but you have the people in the room. Back when we did it, we had to travel the country and get laughed out of places because we were saying open source software was a thing that could be on the factory floor. So we crossed that hurdle for you. Now the expectation is you do something really, really cool. And I see the things that the consortium is focusing on, and I think those are the stepping stones to really cool things. So that's my challenge is, in the next 10 years, somebody in this room is going to do something really awesome. It's going to take hard work. And most of that hard work is not going to be software development. It's going to be organizing and building consensus and really leading. But somebody in this room is going to do it.
That's great, Shaun.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaun. Excellent. I appreciate it, Shaun. And as always, like, as you said, those in the room and those who couldn't be here, maybe they're online, maybe they're here, or maybe they're presenting currently because the conference is still going on, or on their way to ICRA. But anyways, thank you to our members, right? I mean, this wouldn't be possible without your engagement, your passion. A lot of the different folks who are contributing either through collaborative organizations or through this organization directly, right? So thank you. Shout out to welcome some of our new members. Numerous has recently joined. Thank you, Lockheed Martin, and Shane will be speaking at lunch. Thank you. And Tech de Monterey, a new university member. So very exciting time. We have some folks here who are considering membership, right? So hopefully through yesterday and today, and then what you're hearing as you engage here today, like you see some value or inspired, right? We get asked like, hey, isn't that your stuff? And like they have this company and they're showing off your stuff. And I'm like, that's the point. So yes, hopefully they were able to leverage it. Shaun made the right point, right? And so that's the idea. We can leverage each other. We're providing resources to enable you to innovate and solve your challenges, right? So feel free to have those conversations, ask us the tough questions, talk amongst yourselves, right? And hopefully there's something here that can be leveraged, and that's the point. So anyways, I want to take a time to invite Michael up to the podium here. He's our ROS-I tech lead here for Americas. He's going to be sharing a little bit of the ROS industrial kind of activities on the technical front that you're kind of here to hear about. So Michael.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so Matt kind of pointed to a few technical updates in his presentation. So I want to highlight a couple of other projects and repos that we've been working on over the past year that aren't going to be talked about later in some of the presentations from our members. And then a little bit about our kind of strategy and plan moving forward for this year as far as repos and technical stuff goes. So one of the projects I wanted to highlight is A5. This is a project that we worked on sort of this collaboration with other ROS-I Consortium members. The idea trying to take scan and plan technology to aircraft maintenance. So this is a project that was funded by Air Force Research Labs with the idea that, hey, we could take scan and plan and try to do a lot of different maintenance activities that the Air Force is currently doing. So focusing on things like sanding, composite repair with some ideas, and inspection. So this project started in 2017, basically kind of made a reincarnation of the Godel scan and plan framework in A5, added a lot of different improvements to it as well. So we had several cool successful demos doing sanding back in 2017 and 2018, took a little pause and worked on a phase 2 over the last couple of years, culminating in a demo in March, I believe, doing X-ray inspection of F-15 inlet ducts. So as a part of that, we added a lot of really cool things to our scan and plan paradigm in A5. So some stuff, instead of actually doing surface reconstruction, we developed this sort of idea of a process model where we can take a mesh of an object we're working on, take the whole scan data that we acquire and actually align that mesh to our scan data, but then also embed a lot of other process information in that as well, like camera viewpoints for detailed scanning or inspection, as well as like process waypoints, if we wanted to sand, or in this case, do sort of inspection with a different X-ray tool. So we had a lot of neat ideas there. We also did a lot of work for confined space motion planning, which I think is really interesting, doing that in the framework of Move It. So we had a lot of really, really neat capabilities there, trying to navigate really large and unwieldy tool into a really small space. We also did some work on bridging ROS to OPC UA, trying to interact with tools and PLCs. So a lot of that code is out there in open source. It's all accessible to consortium members. So I kind of wanted to highlight that. A lot of interesting pieces. Maybe you don't want to use the full A5 framework, but there's a lot of stuff there that you can cannibalize for your own application. So I wanted to highlight that a little bit. Matt mentioned the blending milestone 5 FTP, and Dave's going to talk about that later today. So I want to touch on some of the cool tech updates that we're doing for that. But that project is about bringing scan and plan to steel foundries and doing finishing of castings. So again, this is sort of another incarnation in ROS2 of Godel and A5 and the whole scan and plan pipeline. But it's based on a scan and plan workshop. Like Matt mentioned, this is the thing that we demoed here at Automate at the SwRI booth. But we've been using this as a training tool. It's all built in ROS2 using sort of kind of the latest and greatest in surface reconstruction and motion planning. So as a part of this blending milestone 5, we're going to be doing several new hardware implementations. So, we've got our MotoMan HC10 out on the show floor, but we're also doing an implementation on our MH180 at SwRI, on a Kawasaki robot at Iowa State, and then another MotoMan robot at our partner site at Fisher. So we'll have lots of cool examples. We're going to make them all open source, and hopefully for you guys that sort of just gives more examples about like, how do I take this framework and add my own hardware and stuff to it, right? I think a lot of times it's not super obvious, and so that's what we're trying to do with the whole scan and plan workshop is say like, hey, these are the pieces that you need to add to be able to deploy this in your own facilities. So that'll be really cool. We've also added a lot of new capabilities to the tools that Scan and Plan Workshop is based on. So a lot of the improvements we're making are to the toolpath planners. So we're going to be adding region of interest selection detectors. So basically being able to like take RGB images and find region of interest that have been added onto parts and use that for finding the areas where we want to generate toolpaths. Iowa State's also going to be contributing their CAM style toolpath planners. We're pretty excited about that. And then we've done some improvements as well to just toolpath modifications for grinding processes. So doing things like lead in, lead out, angling the tool so you can kind of drag a grinding stone or some other media across the surface. Also making some motion planning updates, trying to do things like constant TCP velocity time parameterization, which is a little bit different than the algorithm that currently exists both in MOVEit and Tesseract. So keep an eye on this. This exists out on our ROS Industrial Consortium GitHub org, so we'll be making a lot of changes to that in the near future. We'll talk a little bit about Tesseract as well. So this is what we're leveraging for a motion planning environment for scan and plan. So we've been doing quite a bit of work to that over the past year. So to the kind of core framework here, we've done a lot of improvements on code coverage and code quality, trying to improve sort of the memory footprint and runtime performance of Tesseract. So those have been kind of the bulk of the changes that have been made in the past year. So just trying to make things a little bit more robust. As far as the planning side goes, we've been trying to do sort of a greater refactor of how all the planners are organized, just to make them a little bit more modular, easier to customize. So that's an ongoing effort. Again, adding new time parameterization algorithms as we find cool things that we want to add. And then we went through a big effort of taking this whole planning task composition and making it plugin based, again, just to kind of make it more modular, easier to customize, easier to kind of add new features in without having to compile a whole bunch of code. So kind of a lot of real technical stuff going on there, but really good work. As far as Tesseract goes, we're again in the process of kind of porting our initial implementation over to an IFOP framework. Again, same sort of deal, trying to make it easier to add custom constraints in a supportable, more open sort of way. I think new this year is the Tesseract QT repository. So we've done, Levi Armstrong's done a lot of work on improving RViz widgets and just improving sort of the general usability of Tesseract via RViz and the GUI aspect. So some cool stuff to look at there. A lot of work on Tesseract ROS-2 as well. It's been a little bit neglected in the past, but kind of reached parity with the ROS-1 interface. So Matt touched on this a little bit too. We've been working a project internally we're calling SwRI, based on some consortium feedback about wanting to use all these ROS-I tools in a CAD style environment. So we've done a lot of really cool work there, being able to like build models and URDFs and sort of define all the planning environment in a free CAD type environment. And we've got a lot of cool new capabilities about using motion planners that we've built into that as well. So I'm hoping to share a little bit more of this later today in our workshop. But we're currently beta testing this. So if you guys are interested, please reach out and we'd love to get this in y'all's hands and let you test it out and give us some feedback. Kind of touch on this briefly too. There's been a lot of activity in the development of ROS drivers for in ROS-2 this year. So we're really excited about that. It's been a little bit of a challenge in previous years is say I've got all the rest of my stuff in ROS-2, but you know, a lot of the hardware interfaces were not quite there. So Ted Miller from Yaskawa is going to talk about their Moto ROS-2 implementation. We're excited about that. And there's been a lot of other work. For URs, Picnic contributed an ABB EGM ROS-2 control driver. That's pretty exciting. So a lot of really cool stuff going on there. We've also been kind of working a little bit with the hardware interfaces working group, trying to talk a little bit about, you know, how do we standardize like the behavior of these drivers? Are there things that we, you know, should set aside as specifications to kind of make the behavior from one driver to another a little bit more consistent? So if you guys have feedback or want to participate in that, please reach out because we definitely need more contributors, more sort of voice of industry here, I think. So kind of wrapping up here, looking forward, some things that I'm interested in doing this year, you know, kind of fall into a couple different categories, but the main one is kind of lowering the barrier of entry, trying to make these tools more accessible, right? So not all of us are, software people who really enjoy building code, right? We want to get this stuff out on the factory floor and get people using it. So to me, that kind of means let's focus a little bit more on GUI interfaces, Python wrappers for things for libraries that we can, right? Just to make it a little bit easier to start using these things, be better about releasing things to the build farm. That way you don't have to build it from source. And again, focusing a little bit on the Windows compatibility, right? Not everybody's on Linux. So as we're kind of going through our tools, we've done a lot of work porting from ROS-I to ROS-II. So some things we're thinking about are kind of deliberate design changes as we're going through this, right? And so we're trying to put together kind of UML style diagrams and break our repositories apart and really understand like where does ROS-I, where's the ROS interface fit on these tools, and what can we do to kind of be able to support other frameworks and support ROS-I and ROS-II with the same tools at the same time. So there's a lot of that going on. So I'm hoping to kind of continue that work for a lot of different repositories and produce documentation and some like sort of design things that people can look at and say, okay, here, this is how these repositories work and how they're structured. Just kind of communicate that a little bit better. We got some ongoing ports as well. We've done a lot with our Reach Study repository. We actually received a community contributed ROS-II port, which was awesome. It was really great. And then some of these other tools, Noter for toolpath planning, industrial calibration are kind of on our radar for ports from ROS-I to ROS-II. So definitely look forward to that. Got some resources here, a lot of links kind of aggregated in one spot. I kind of just want to raise awareness that you guys have access to a lot of private repositories on our ROS Industrial Consortium GitHub. So if you guys are interested in kind of kicking the tires on things like A5 and the blending FTP projects, please let us know. We can get you access. We basically just need your GitHub user handle. So let us know. We're hosting sort of monthly community developer meetings as well. We'd love to have you guys attend. If there's things that you want to talk about or things you want to have talked about, please let us know. We'd love to put it on the agenda. A lot of times we're kind of just thinking about, oh, what are we working on? But we really want it to be valuable for everybody. Anyway, thanks. Oh, thank you for your time. Yep.